Hi, it's Nick from the podcast. Just to mention that my new comics Kickstarter FairyFare is launching today. This is my reunion with my Little Deaths of Watson Tower artist, Rosie Alexander, for our new story about fairies and mythological creatures coming to help with our day-to-day tasks. It's a very fun comic, it's a very brightly coloured comic, as you might have expected if you've seen much of Rosie's recent art. If you want to check it out, there should be a link in the show notes, and there should also be a link in any social media feed I have access to be honest. And as I say, this launches today, and I hear the more people you can get early, the better. So if you fancy checking it out, please do. Thank you very much for listening. Here is your moderate fantasy violence.
Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we'll be reviewing The Suicide Squad, not to be confused with Suicide Squad from 2016. This is James Gunn's sequel to the previous film. We'll then be discussing the second series of German sci-fi drama Biohackers. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yes, as well as returning to the cinema to watch The Suicide Squad, I also went back slightly before that to watch Deerskin, a subtitled French film about a man who talks to his coat. It's also about some other things, but I think it's just a shame to ruin it, to be honest. I think a lot of the random plot moves are just sad to mention out of context. But yes, we both saw this film. It's a fairly recent release, I think. It stars Jean Dujardin as Georges, who is the coat-talking man in question, who just really loves Deerskin. It's very, very hard to talk about this film without spoiling it, because it is very strange. But yeah, a man blows his life savings on a very nice deerskin jacket, and then it starts telling him to do things, and wackiness ensues.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this as well when we went to see it. I think it's got a real absurdist sort of sense of humour. It's one of those films that you really have to kind of just go with it. And then if you do, you'll find it very, very funny, because it's just got this very sort of bizarre plot arc and structure.
Yeah, it's very po-faced about its premise. Like, the actor Dujardin playing the main character, he really nails this sort of dead serious on a mission thing. This sort of real sense of divine purpose this man seems to have. It's like, listen sir, I'll have you know that this jacket told me to do this, and I take this as seriously as you take your wedding vows. He's a very driven man. He's on a mission. He could be playing Batman for the level of seriousness with which he is taking this silly film, and it's very strange and very funny.
Yeah, the humour very much comes from the seriousness that everyone takes the whole thing about, the jacket. Because he meets another character played by Adele Hansel, who was in Portrait of a Lady on Fire. The sort of story they have is that they're making a film together. Yeah, so again, I don't want to say too much, but there is something the film's trying to do about, you're watching a film about people making a film, and it's quite an absurd, weird film they're making, and this is quite an absurd, weird film.
Yeah, there is some film within a film shit going on, and as you say, the relationship between the two main characters it's just this very odd back and forth where you're like, does she not think he's insane? Is she actually also insane? It's honestly sometimes hard to tell. But yeah, it's very enjoyable. It very much gets the most out of its weird premise. It's only, I think, about, according to the Google data I've just pulled up, an hour and 20 minutes long, which is about right for something this silly. So yeah, I enjoyed this a lot of an evening.
Yeah, I would also recommend this film a lot. If you want something that's very off the beaten track, it's definitely got this sort of French absurdist thing going on. So it's not like most of the comedies you'll see probably in the cinema this year. So it's worth going if you want to see something different.
I also agree. I don't get out to as much subtitled cinema as Alistair, but this was great. Seek it out if it's playing in your area. So anyway, I've been staring bemused at that film. Alistair, what have you consumed in the last fortnight?
So I went to see Edgar Wright's new film, The Sparks Brothers. I think his first documentary about the band Sparks, who are one of those bands that always held up as one of the most influential bands of all time, but not one of the most famous. They're always successful, kind of on the cusp of becoming extremely sort of famous, becoming part of, mainstream music, inverted commas, but then always seem to subside a bit, have a quiet period, and then come back. But they are one of those bands that, music nerds and other bands love to cite as being really, really influential. They're a very odd band. Their music's very funny, and their kind of stage performances are quite strange, and they've got this sort of arts for art's sake thing going going on. You know, they always do their own thing. They rarely do what's popular, which is one of the reasons why they've never achieved like massive success. Their sort of slightly weird style and artist persona really meshes well with Edgar Wright's quite stylized directing. So this is much more than your regular kind of bland talking head rock doc. There's lots of like bizarre animated bits and strange, I don't know, quirks and things that he puts on the interviews. It's also got like a phenomenal selection of people they interview. You know, there's Beck, Mike Myers, Todd Rundgren, Weird Al Yankovic, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, the guy from Franz Ferdinand, whose name just escapes me, Duran, New Order. I'm sure there's like loads of missing out. So it is like a really spectacular lineup of people that, you know, all these people who've been influenced by Sparks over the years and want to pay tribute to them.
Yeah, I've seen the trailer for this, and it did successfully make you think, maybe I should give this band a chance, which is, I guess, very much what you're after with this sort of thing. I've honestly barely heard of them at all.
Yeah, again, one of the things, they're very influential but not supremely well known. Like, their most popular song is the 70s song, This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us. And I was listening to some of the other stuff just before I went into the film, the kind of most popular ones on Spotify, and I didn't recognise any of their most popular songs other than This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us, even though they've got millions of listens. I think there is like a kind of a fan base out there that's really into them, but it's always just kind of bubbling below the mainstream.
I mean, yeah, they do, based on the snippets of video I saw during this trailer, very much have the sense of cult success about them. The people who love them really love them.
Exactly, and I think there's a lot to like dig into. Like, they write very complex song making, complex lyrics. They keep like changing styles, and like so many times they've been like ahead of the curve, which is, again, is not a great recipe for popularity. So like in 1979 they put out basically a disco album before disco became super popular in kind of the heyday of punk and post-punk. Again, it's like too ahead of its time, didn't become popular. There's so much trailblazing strange stuff they did, which is one of the things that makes it just like an enthralling film. It's just like so many albums, so many styles, so many like looks or aesthetics that kind of cannons through them really quickly.
You said it was sort of funny, their music. Is that the same as comedy music?
Yeah, like it is sort of comedy music to some degree. Like, some of them makes you laugh. Like, they have Weird Al Yankovic, one of the people they interview, and he makes a good point, which is that because Sparks are quite funny, they maybe not taken as seriously or as respected as like really like serious or like dour bands. There is something almost in music where it's like the darker, more dour you are, the more seriously you get taken. So there's some like amazing Sparks songs. Like, there's one called like All I Do Is Dick Around, which is just,
That's a good title.
I know, it's just really funny. And like, they did a collaborative album with Franz Ferdinand a few years ago, and like the advanced single was called something like I Suck at Collaborations. They're all like weird things like that. You know, they've got a song called like Number One Song in Heaven that's, if you listen to the lyrics, it's just very funny. So yeah, and they've got this very sort of strange persona. It's kind of hard to describe. You really have to watch either them on YouTube or see the film. They have this very sort of strange persona, which is kind of funny. Like, it's very like artist, but it's sort of like, again, not dissimilar to Deerskin. It's quite absurd, which just sort of makes it funny because like you can't really take it seriously, the kind of persona and performance. Like, one of them has like a Hitler moustache, and he's like, he does look a bit like Hitler, and it's just this kind of weird thing. Like, you know, when they broke through, a lot of people like saying, why is Hitler on keyboards in this band?
Well, he had to hide somewhere, I suppose. I've seen Edgar Wright out and about on Twitter and stuff doing press for this, and he does have a very sort of infectious fandom for it. He just seems really very much, I just want to tell you about this band, guys. I'm just excited. I just love them so much.
Their style, I think, really suits Edgar Wright. Like, rock docs is a genre he excels at, because like he does fast-paced films, lots of music cues, all sorts of different songs, strong sense of like style. It really works, especially with something that's consciously arty as Sparks is.
Seeing Edgar Wright out and about talking about it and watching the trailer and stuff did successfully make me think, maybe I should watch that film and then get into Sparks. I haven't done either, of course, but it made me think it.
If you haven't heard of Sparks before, the film is a good intro as well. I think Edgar Wright said he wanted to make a film that was like for the fans, but also for people who've never heard of Sparks. It's like a way in. So if you've never heard of Sparks, don't let that put you off. If you really like Edgar Wright, this is a great Edgar Wright film. If you are intrigued by the trailer and want to see it, then yeah, go see it, because it is really entertaining.
Okay, I might. Okay, and first up today, we are here to have a chat about The Suicide Squad, the somewhat sequel to 2016's Suicide Squad. This time it's written and directed by James Gunn during his brief Twitter-imposed hiatus from the Guardians franchise, and he's recruited a new Suicide Squad, although featuring a few old faces from the previous film. Margot Robbie is of course back as Harley Quinn, Joel Kinnaman and Jai Courtney also reprised their parts from the first film, along with Viola Davis as Amanda Waller, the harsh taskmaster of Task Force X, alongside a raft of new supervillains played by such actors as Idris Elba, John Cena, Peter Capaldi, Nathan Fillion, Michael Rooker, a smorgasbord of actors you've sort of recognised from a lot of other things coming along to play random supervillains and often die after various lengths of time. This time their mission is to go to the fictional island of Corso Maltese and blow up an ancient Nazi laboratory that has something weird under it. A weird bit of DC mythology is buried under there, and if you think by the end of the film they're going to have to fight it, and probably some more of them will die, then you'd be correct. So we've seen this film in the cinema. It's a very fun film to go back to the cinema and watch because there's a lot of noise and explosions. Alistair, what did you think of it?
So this was very entertaining, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think we gave quite a negative review to the 2016 Suicide Squad, but this is almost a different film in terms of, you know, kind of the way it's handled and the way it goes about. You know, it's just got fun kind of imbued into it at every level. We've talked a lot on this podcast about the modern cinematic blend, the Marvel sauce or Whedonism, whatever you want to call it, of kind of action plus comedy, which does work, and obviously James Gunn is known for doing that in like Guardians films, you know, very typically Marvel, and he does that here. It's both got great action and a strong sense of humor, but the humor does feel like of itself. I mean, it doesn't feel like basically they've just kind of done a Marvel film. This does seem to have its own sense of humor. It's a 15, it's got much more gore and there's like sex in it, so this is like a much more grown up, much darker, much more bloody, in some ways also more slapstick sense of humor. So, you know, if you're tired of like, oh yeah, another like bantery plus action film, this actually did seem to some degree fresh within that sort of subgenre, which is why I really liked it.
Yeah, it's got a very playfully extremely violent energy. Like, if you're amused by the idea of a character who had just been talking a second ago being suddenly ripped in half by a giant shark, and then Idris Elba says, fuck, then yeah, that's the joke. That's the joke again and again and again. You will probably enjoy this film if that sort of thing entertains you. Yeah, it's played on a very sort of wry slapstick level, and there's a good sort of escalation from quick casual murder to massive high stakes murder by the end of the film. I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure if it translates into genuine genius. I don't think it's big or clever, and I think it probably is a bit one note, but it's a note I find massively entertaining. It commits to its comic bookness in a way I enjoy. A sort of a similar playful, loving, this is silly but we like it vibe to my beloved Legends of Tomorrow, except obviously with the slightly more mature, violent edge to it. You know, it's a maturity that works, whereas the first Suicide Squad felt a bit try-hard and gimmicky, and to be honest, a bit sort of, like we said about the other great DC film of the time, Dawn of Justice, kind of like a bit try-hard and teenage. Like, it really wanted to be a mature film but didn't have the machinery to actually do it. It just had people standing around posing in half light. And this film, lots of people get really, really disgustingly murdered, and then people say fuck, because in that circumstance you probably would. And it's all well deployed, it's very confident, it very much has its tone, and it very much executes it very nicely. Certainly in terms of setting out to do something and then very stylishly achieving it, this is probably the best, most well made of the DC films of recent years.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the one I've got the least to criticise about here. This is aimed squarely, I think, at being entertaining, which is, I think, one of the things that DC has really fallen down on in the past. I mean, again...
that little side point of actually entertaining people.
Well, this is a serious problem, I feel, is that, like, when you take things too seriously, like Zack Snyder does, when you're basically, like, really invested in, like, mythology and, you know, the kind of iconic nature of superheroes, and you're trying to, like, link it to, like, I don't know, this idea of, like, the great warrior throughout history, trying to bring the sense of the epic from, like, Greek myth into the modern superhero film. I mean, you can do all those things, and I'm sure they've been done successfully many times in the comics and in some films, but you've got to remember this is like a popcorn medium. It's a blockbuster. The fun and kind of entertainment element has to be like part of this. And fun doesn't necessarily mean silly. This film is kind of silly. Okay, fun doesn't necessarily mean childish, should we say, because this film's not really childish. fun doesn't necessarily mean nothing serious, but like there has to be like something, an sort of escapist kind of entertainment element to it. And this film kind of does that in a sort of comic-y way. As you say, like we've got like these soldiers on a mission, but they're all wearing very like superhero costumes. Like one guy is like Peacemaker, he's got like a sort of yellow bodysuit thing with exposed arms and like a big shiny helmet. It's like no one's under any impression this is supposed to be like serious army thing where this guy's supposed to be camouflage or something like that. It's just very much of like he's a superhero on a mission or a super villain, and you're kind of buying into that level. Like this is entertainment spectacle. I'm not here to discover something deeper about the human condition. I'm just here to be entertained, and it is very entertaining.
And considering it is basically just one long action scene which lasts 2 and a bit hours, it goes back a bit in time and stuff to fill in how these people were recruited to the Suicide Squad, at least a couple of them. It is more or less a single continuous action scene, and if you're going to make 2 hours of that work, there has to be a range of actual imaginative variations to the action, and it has to be nicely shot, and it really is very lovingly rendered, this endless parade of violence. James Gunn has taken a lot of time over all these shots of people's heads being popped open. This is obviously one thing people sometimes cite as the difference between DC films and Marvel films. DC does seem a little happier to let the directors go, whereas Marvel perhaps pens them into what seems like a house style a bit. I enjoy Black Widow fine, but this is a lot more visually flamboyant and fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one probably even more so because, the first Suicide Squad was not a success. And also the fact they've got James Gunn. I mean, like, why spend all the money getting James Gunn and not have him make the film that he wants to make? I mean, it's the only really route to a successful film. And obviously they have made a successful film, so they made the right creative decisions.
Yeah, and it's well handled, I think. Like, technically this is a sequel to a previous film, but you do not have to have seen that film. There's a 5-minute explanation at the beginning of what the Suicide Squad premise is. Government take prisoner, implant bomb in head, say, do mission or we blow you up. If you succeed, get time off sentence. That's basically it. They explain that in a few minutes at the beginning and then go. The inevitable mission briefing scene, and we're off. Even though it's got pre-existing characters in it, there's a couple of characters in the previous Suicide Squad film. There is a degree of continuity with previous stuff, but this really is a completely standalone film to an almost impressive degree. Obviously, I'm sure there's comic shout-outs and references in there because I think James Gunn's the sort of guy who might include them. And obviously, in order to fill out the ranks, because the cast of this film is massive, I listed a tiny amount of them at the beginning because he's done the clever thing to do when you're making a Suicide Squad film, which is to have a huge bench of random supervillains so you can just kill them off the cuff without having no cast left. Yeah, the problem with the previous Suicide Squad film, yes, another negative comparison to the previous one, but it really was quite bad, is that it had about 6 characters in it, so they could only kill one of them at the very beginning in a really crap offhanded way. Whereas in this film, there's loads of the bastards and they just die left, right and centre when they need to. Death really is everywhere in this film. You'll be shockingly immune to casual murder after sitting through 2 hours of this.
Yeah, which is I think what contributes to its kind of unique, or at least its slightly different sense of humour in that there is not as much comedy violence in a Marvel film. They do really lean into it, like I say, like some high profile named actors from kind of geek culture and superhero films get killed. I don't think there's any really point in spoiling who at this point.
I think who dies when is really the big thing you have in this film. I'm leaning away from spoiling exactly who dies when.
Yeah, exactly. But they had the courage to kill some big names early on, which is from the beginning really sets up like, wow, anyone could die at any one point, and usually quite a violent and sudden way. And it kind of establishes that tone and then just runs with it, and it consistently maintains it throughout. And there's none of the sort of thing like, here are 5 well-known actors playing well-known DC characters, and the character Bob, played by someone you've never heard of. Oh, look, Bob's the one that gets killed like straight away. Who could have predicted that? It's kind of basically the opposite of that.
Part of me thought I was occasionally seeing a bit of Tarantino-esqueness in it, but I'm not sure I'm cinephile enough to get that right. We've talked a lot about the slapstick violence of it. For the record, this film does also have enough characterizations, not just be stuff going boom boom splat. The characters are rounded out enough that their deaths, or at least the deaths of the few characters who are given an arc, have a bit more weight, and their interactions, because there is a period where you actually have a stable cast and they actually interact, and those interactions are good and fun. I mean, they do often interact by doing violence together as a way of keeping the film moving. But yeah, there is a good solid core of characterization here to keep you engaged in some of the more random slapstick.
Absolutely, yeah. And they've got a very talented cast. Lots of great people in the cast, and obviously they do like good performances. People who are good at doing action movie things. Like we've seen Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn in 3 films now, and she does that performance very well, and it's very funny, entertaining. Obviously, like Idris Elba does like sardonic. He does that very well. Obviously, like the big shark. Is just funny in and of itself. Yeah, they've got a strong cast of both characters and actors. Peter Capaldi again he's kind of riffing a bit on playing the Doctor, that he's playing like an evil science genius. I think that, again, the strength of the film is the casting and how they've kind of put people together. Like you say, to make it be more than just slapstick ultra-violence.
It's sometimes not a huge amount more than that, but I think it does hold together as a story, and there's some enjoyable deployment of big, silly DC concepts. For the record, since that's often the weakness of these films, it does actually ramp up quite well to its finale. I actually enjoyed the big final action showdown. I did not sit there going, yeah, okay, sure, is this box ticked yet? Like the rest of the film, it's decent, well choreographed action, which feels climactic and fun.
Yeah, definitely. Builds to a good conclusion. Again, brings the kind of core characters together. Yeah, they've thrown money at this, and it does action spectacle well. Like I say, it ticks every box in the list of things it needs to be, like kind of entertaining blockbuster.
I'm actually quite impressed by how much money they've thrown at this. Like, it does look great. Like, they've really committed to filming this level of cartoon silliness. And I'm a bit this film seems a bit niche and strange and silly to perhaps take off and become a universal mega hit. I'm impressed by just how expensive it must have been.
I mean, it is good and it looks good and it's got a great cast and people haven't been to the cinema in ages. This might be the thing to really lure people back in big ways, and it's got loads of people that people will love in it. I could see this being very successful.
I hope so. But I don't honestly know if you necessarily need to do a direct sequel to this, but I would be happy to generally reward them for doing this sort of thing instead of making more films like the first one.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. There are things that, I could say about it. There definitely are some criticisms. I think there's a plot line that sort of involves the politics of the island that they're on, how there's been a kind of a coup and now there's this military regime and the military generals are kind of introduced as sort of villains, and there's a bit when they've captured Harley Quinn, and that kind of rumbles on mainly in the middle of the film, and it's sort of just basically jettisoned at the end. It doesn't, I think, fully link up with the other plot. Kind of complex plotting is not really the strength of this film. I did like that they kind of ditched everything to go for full spectacle in like the final action scene, but the kind of twists and turns on the way to get there, some of them don't really pay off properly.
Yeah, well, I think the film has its eye on the big action set piece at the end, and I don't know, the island politics stuff is mostly background, except for there's a small Harley Quinn diversion, which sort of works. In fact, to be fair, yeah, I guess because she is probably still the most popular character in this, Harley Quinn gets a couple of sort of spotlight sections where she gets to just, go it alone and do her thing. And they are a bit of a diversion from the main action of the film, but they are also very well made and fun, and Margot Robbie is definitely incredibly good in that part, so I don't really begrudge them it.
Yeah, no, and it all sort of works. And there's great music, which James Gunn is, well known, especially in the Guardians of the Galaxy, for really choosing great songs.
Yeah, I guess, that's very much become a James Gunn signature, the well-timed song drop, and there's a lot of those here. A lot of enjoyably niche songs cast at disingenuously fun moments. So yeah, if you're in the market for fun and you enjoy ultra-violence, there's a lot of fun here. Okay, and second up, we'll be covering the second season of the German techno-thriller series Biohackers. This is a show on Netflix which we watched last year. I think it was one of the first original shows we found to watch in the early dark days of the pandemic, and even though it was a bit of a random spot, we ended up really enjoying it, I think. This is, of course, about Mia, a medical student who returns to the university with, well, in season 1, it was a mission to uncover the dark dealings of Professor Lorenz, her tutor who has got some involvement in her brother's death, but that was all resolved in season 1, and then at the end of the season, they were kidnapped, both of them, Mia and Professor Lorenz. What will happen now? Let's find out. Alistair, was it any good?
Yeah, I did enjoy this. Picks up, as you say, just where the last series left off, with a big mystery, why was Mia kidnapped and what happened to her? It sort of jumps forward in time with her basically coming round back in her old life, but with a large chunk of memory missing, and several months have passed and things have changed. And right straight from the off, it goes in with mystery right at the core of this, what's happened to her, what happened in that time, why is her memory gone, and then she starts to experience other strange side effects. And what I like about this show is that it's kind of got this mystery at the core of it. The first episode, the first series, again strongly sets up the mystery of the first series straight away. And this one again, so it doesn't mess around. It's kind of straight to, these are the plot, this is what the characters are trying to investigate, and again peels back the layers of what's going on. And it's a really good source of tension, this kind of mystery they're trying to uncover. There's lots of bits involved in sneaking into places and having to steal things, and it's just a great source of tension and mystery. And the whole show is kind of quite far-fetched in the way it's almost even though it's quite a serious show, it is also quite silly. and you kind of just have to like go with it. But it is a really entertaining mystery if you kind of buy into the world of the show.
I was slightly disappointed by this second season, I must admit. I did not get quite as much out of it. I didn't find it quite as enjoyably far-fetched, I think, or as exciting. The mystery seemed a bit straightforward. The levels of intrigue were kind of obvious. Like, when the first season, Mia was this sort of opaque protagonist in that she always had this agenda and she was pushing this incredibly complicated plan that we weren't privy to. And seeing her as the unsure outsider picking around the mysterious machinations of an evil man was, I don't know, a bit less exciting for me. And her friends, the supporting cast, who I quite enjoyed last year, seemed a bit underutilised. So yeah, this didn't do as much for me, I'm afraid. To be honest, the big thing that torpedoed this a bit for me was her relationship with Jasper, the love interest guy, which I found really weird because he massively turned evil at the end of season 1. Not just in he was a bit mean to her or something. He like started stomping around wearing a black hoodie and tried to do a mass murder by unleashing some, I think they were bugs carrying an evil virus on a train because he was annoyed with Mia and wanted to stop her from ruining his research or something. I really did think that might be a deal breaker. I really thought mass murder might be something the relationship can't come back from. But instead there's this weird angle where they've somehow reconciled and he's somehow made this okay with her off screen during this memory gap she's got, and she can't remember it, but she sort of just goes with it. And I kept waiting for some kind of other shoe to drop on this storyline, the part where they reveal how the hell it is okay that he did this. I thought that was meant to be like a mystery, or that, you know, it's part of Mia's plan, or that it's part of his plan or something, and just never happened. Apparently he's just okay now. Apparently he's gone to the evil rehab program and recovered from evil. I don't know. I found, honestly, his continued presence without this being addressed was so fucking weird, but I think it probably undercut the show a lot for me.
Yeah, that is a problem. There's no getting around it. That like how the first series of like revealing Jasper is evil is sort of retconned quite heavily in this, and it isn't really believable in that sense.
Or explained, or even tried to explain. Like, I don't know, I mean, is that actor just really popular in Germany? Do they just really like him? Did they just want to keep him around? Did someone's plan fall through? I don't understand why they couldn't have just given her supporting cast to hang around and talk to. Because, I don't know, if he was phenomenally charismatic and exciting and really brought a lot to the show, I might sort of let them off and understand. I mean, I'd still probably criticise them, but I would maybe be a bit less sharp about it. But I don't really understand why we need to twist the rules of logic and nature to bring this character, this specific man, back. He's not that exciting, guys.
Yeah, I mean, and they make the odd decision of basically jettisoning the other love interest from the first series, Nicholas. He's basically just like not in the second series, just so they can bring back Jasper, which is just sort of like, yeah, slightly bizarre. I also felt that the friends stroke flatmates were underutilized, especially, yeah, the kind of closer friends who are a great supporting cast. Her sort of best friend, like Ching Lu, she's played more of a role in the first series. The actress who plays Xing Zhang, I thought was very good. There's also like Ula, the other housemate, who's the kind of the comedy character. He's very funny, but again, he's underused in this series. What I did like is that the fourth friend of the group, Lotta, who was very much a sort of comedy drunken party girl in the first series, was given more of a character in this series, and the plot kind of relates to her family, which meant that like they could expand that role and make her into a more three-dimensional character. But it's a shame they kind of did that seemingly at the expense of the characters I really liked from the first series of Chen Liu and Ula.
Yeah, I'd have liked to see more of the previous flatmates. I would also have liked to see more biohacking in Biohackers, maybe. Like, I thought one of the things that was quite fun and charming and interesting about season 1 was they'd occasionally reveal that they created mice that glow in the dark, or a plant that's also a spade or something. And not a real example. And you know, I quite enjoyed the random messing with science stuff. I mean, that may also be a crime against nature, but it was quite entertaining, and I enjoyed it. And apart from one joke about Ola making a thing that attaches to his penis in an early episode, there's not really a lot of that in this season either. I missed
that
it.
bit was very funny too.
It was very funny. I'm an easy mark for basic dick jokes, but yes, I would have liked a bit more biohacking in my Biohackers also.
Yeah, I mean, the arc plot involves biological research. The mystery, I don't want to say too much about it for people who haven't seen it, but the mystery they're investigating involves like genetics and biological research and sort of testing of like illegal drugs and things like that. So they're bringing in that kind of issues from the first series involving like medical research and big pharmaceutical companies and things like that. But there's less of the fun, slightly over the top kind of biohacking, like doing like crazy things like making weird plants and like weird animals. Or like glow-in-the-dark mice.
Yes, and I missed them. Yeah, they did bring back the previous villain, Professor Lorenz, from the last season. It was, I guess, a bit of a traditional Season 2 angle. You forced them to team up with their old enemy. And sure enough, she's back, and she's moved back in with her own mother, and she's really bitter and stroppy, and that's basically her storyline. It's not the most dignified return of the previous villain, but it is quite funny. Weirdly, in a show that occasionally seemed to have jettisoned a lot of the things I liked about it, the new angle of Lorenz squabbling with her mother gone on through full teenage reversion, as we all do when we move back with our parents for too long.
Yeah, there was a sort of a plot line of her, acclimatizing herself to the situation in her new life. I like that they didn't basically kind of rehash the first series, which I was kind of worried that they would do. They seem to move on from it. That's very much shown in how they treated the Dr. Lorenz character, in that she's not the villain of the second series. She was the villain of the first series. She's still in it, but kind of playing a sort of supporting role. You're kind of finding out about what happened to her after the events of the first series, which kind of gives the whole thing a kind of sense of like progression and things like that. I mean, a lot of shows that have like kind of strong concepts do so kind of sometimes struggle to move on from the idea of the first series.
They have at least not just walked back the ending and rehashed the first season. Long-term listeners may remember me absolutely railing the second season of Killing Eve for doing exactly that.
Yeah, that's a very good example, yeah.
And I have indeed stuck by my guns and just not watched any of the subsequent episodes. This is not quite as annoyingly retrograde as that, but it's nice that they found a new angle. I'm just not sure I loved it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid criticism. Certainly, yeah. Especially things like the flaw with the Jasper character. I guess I kind of felt that like I kind of set my disbelief aside, in that the show is kind of always been a bit silly, even though it's not really like a comedy show. It's got some funny moments in it. It's not trying to do a sort of a self-aware thing, but it is also, there's a kind of far-fetched nature that you have to buy into it. I mean, the possibility they push that too far in this series without kind of finding something really fun to do in pushing it, the far-fetchedness further.
I mean, yeah, one of the things I enjoyed about the first season, to be honest, was the ridiculous nature of the conspiracy. And to be honest, one of the things I'm kind of criticising about the second one is that I found the conspiracy disappointingly sedate. Or maybe I just can't be pleased, I don't know. I found the main plot a bit too mundane, and the characterisation I thought they pushed a bit too far, to the point that it became far-fetched. These people can't win with me.
Yeah, I guess the second series is difficult. There are a lot of sort of second series flaws in this, about like things not kind of worked through properly, or heavy retconning from the first series just so they could basically have the same characters in. I mean, it kind of reminds me of like how Heroes had Sylar, who clearly should have just been like a one-series villain, but he was so popular that they just kept forcing him into the show, which just really didn't work. But I guess the issue with this is that they had Zachary Quinto to play Sylar, who's a good actor, or a great actor, and Sylar's at least an interesting character, which is why they felt they had to keep him around. They've kind of got that problem for Jasper, but he's neither particularly interesting character nor particularly like charismatic actor, certainly not compared to like Zachary Quinto.
Yeah, I don't really understand that either. I mean, Luna Wedler's very good as the lead. She carries the show pretty well. I found she got more to do in the first season when she was kind of the mastermind rather than this sort of confused sick person, but yeah, she's pretty good. And yeah, the guy playing the villain's pretty good, although it's not the most interesting character. He's got a sort of German Jason Isaacs thing going on. It's fun.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll do another series. We've left certainly some plot threads dangling that they'll be picking up in the next series.
There's a massive cliffhanger. I guess they're fishing for it.
Yeah, they did the massive cliffhanger in the first series. The way they're moving on with the next series indicates, again, more forward progression. We'll see where that goes. They're clearly not sort of treading water.
Yeah, I don't really engage with Biohackers fandom, so I don't know to what extent they've been criticised for the Jasper stuff, so maybe they'll get absolutely smashed for this in the comments and they'll feel obliged to explain it better next season. Who knows?
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice and leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want to hear still more about what we're up to and, well, more likely what we are consuming in media terms, you can follow us on Twitter as @MFV Podcast, or find us on Facebook as Moderate Fantasy Violence. And you can also find me on Twitter @NickMB, where you can probably hear quite a lot about my new comics Kickstarter, which has started literally today. So this is my new comic FairyFare, about the fairy folk finally starting an app to grant wishes for money, and predictably it turns out there's more to it than that, and two sisters who both work on the app are going to find out exactly what that is. It's a fun comic with art by Rosie Alexander and lots of strange instances of mythological creatures getting involved in everyday life. So yes, if that sounds interesting to you, I'll probably put the link in the show notes, and I imagine it'll be very much all over both my Twitter and the Moderate Fantasy Violence Twitter. So check that out, get involved. If you fancy a read, you can get the PDF copy for a couple of quid, or for a few more quid, you can get it in actual print. Any support much appreciated. Thank Thank you very much.
Yes, and I've read the previous comic that Nick and Rosie Alexander collaborated on, and I could say it's very good, so I'm sure this one will be very good as well, so go support it to make it happen.
It is, it's great.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. You can join us on Moderate Fantasy Violence in 2 weeks' time, when we'll be reviewing Blood Red Sky, a new horror movie on Netflix, and Masters of the Universe, Kevin Smith's adaptation of He-Man. So join us then to find out what we think of those. Until then, have a good one. Goodbye.
Bye.
And also, there's more to look forward to from Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you tune in 2 weeks' time, we'll be reviewing Blood Red...
I mean, I don't mind if you want to disappear into the background entirely, but do you want to mention your own website?
Oh, balls. Forgot about that part. This is what happens when I go off script.